I think LastPass, you know, you can hide the password so people don't actually know it. So that's the reason LastPass is good. They don't actually know the password.
It's even worse. It's my Rainmaker that made up this password that uses it for everything. So
Oh, well,
you know that password, you can get almost anything you want.
We change our passwords. We use the same one just for about everything, and I change them probably every other month, just to be on the safe side.
Yeah, that's next level.
Yeah. And I'll text out a few people like, hey, here's the new password for a bunch of things.
Maybe you need to check out a service that prevents you from having to do that.
we good?
Does anybody want to go through this?
Oh, oops. I mean, there's nothing very tricky, I don't think, but.
Does anyone have like concerns? Like when you say offboarding or exit interviewing, does anybody have some concerns around how they would do that or things you'd want to talk through with the group?
Okay, I do. I have a question. So with her giving her 2 weeks yesterday and it being an admin, how soon do you start going through this process or like do the exit interview? Do you do that like tomorrow or wait to do it like the final week that she's here at the end of next week? When do you do that?
Do everything at the end,
And
like
then,
before the end that's just been a general thing that I've done for years, but I suppose there's really no.
okay.
We usually do ours when we're actually having the phone call of them letting us know. So if somebody says, especially with agents, tends to be a lot of our experience, the first thing we do is have that phone call with them. And that's when we go through the process, because you never know if you can get a hold of them afterwards. And since it's really important for us, so we go over, you know, any leads that we want to do a referral agreement on, because we don't want to just lock them out if they have a good relationship with them. So we go over the referral process if they want to take anybody with them. And then we also go through the exit interview. So we do that when we have the first initial conversation, because a lot of times once they're gone, you don't really have the ability to get a hold of them as easily. So we do it pretty early on.
Great point out for the agent side.
Yeah, that's different for me. I haven't been in that position just yet. It's a good tip.
Anybody else? Questions or thoughts or concerns as you're thinking about offboarding or exit interviewing people?
I think one of the challenging things we see in a team is just what is their sphere of influence that they're taking with them. So I would really look into that in the list and make sure you have some communication around, are we on the same page that this person is your person and not the team's? And how does that process look, right? Does the team just export them? Do we highlight them? Are they marked sphere of influence? What does that look like? And that may have been on your list, Janet. I didn't see it, but
That's actually not on that list, but we mark everybody's clients. We tag them as they go in on Boomtown, so we know at all times who's specific to them and not a referral from Zia Group. So
our agreement is whoever you come with, you leave with. And so I make the agents and our admin as well send me a list of people when they first start. And when they leave, and they're like, oh, will you send me my SOI? I say, definitely. And I look back through my email until I find that list that they send me, and I forward that email back to them and say, here you go. And they're always upset about that because they're like, I've added so many people. Sorry, this is our agreement. Whoever you come with, you leave with. And then we call ours a breakup when we get off-board people because we try to be friends still. And so usually we work it all out and try not to market to all of their people, even that were tagged later on, but we don't make any promises about that.
I was gonna
Actually-
say, how do you, because if you're sending them back the spreadsheet, how are you compensating? Because they're in your database at that point, right? So how are you
Yeah.
compensating so that you aren't working with their people?
We have to go through and trash them, and we have a tag in Boomtown that we call "Do Not Call," that we just tag all of those people. But every once in a while, they'll get emails or some random other marketing, a mailer or something like that. And if that ever happens, we call the agent first if we ever hear about that. Like, oh yeah, my daughter's an agent, kind of a thing. We're like, uh-oh, and then we call that agent. Hey, sorry, we accidentally marketed to your mom, but good news, she wants to buy a house.
I will say when it comes to all of that, make sure that you have good language in your agreement that they sign when they come on board. Because we did have one agent a few years ago where we didn't have a good agreement in place, and he left with, we generally give them 3 to 6 months to finish up any leads that we've given them. And then those leads, those active leads come back to us. And any of those leads that they do close during that, it's the same split, the same deal. Like, we still handle all the transactions. And we had an agent who didn't do that. He took one of our leads and gave us like a small referral fee for it. And we didn't have a good agreement in place. And so there was nothing we could do.
So since we're on the topic of agents right now, one of the things I strongly suggest is having an exit agreement that matches what their original agreement is, because one of the things I learned over time, none of them read their original agreement. They don't even know what they're signing, and then they leave and their expectations are totally off. And it ends up in this dispute where if you have the exit agreement and you're going through everything they originally agreed to, there's no miscommunication, 2 months down the road, everyone's on the same page.
And would they initial
I
or
like that.
sign that exit agreement when they like agreed, your original sales contract or admin contract?
Yes, because the other thing that's in that is we've agreed that you're going to continue to work with this person, this person, this person, and this person. Well, they want to sign it because it's saying they are continuing to work with those people, and they're really not signing anything they didn't already sign. So I never, when I was doing them, I never had any pushback because it's not like we were throwing new stuff in there. Like, we could pull up their original agreement and show them, hey, this is what you originally signed.
Interesting. I like that. I'm adding a few things here.
I think, yeah, it's clarity around it. With the team, when I would run it, I did like Cameron. I had a form though I actually gave them, and they had to submit what their SOI was. And then the only way an SOI would be added is if they had a conversation with me or the Rainmaker about, this is a true person that I know that come from me, and then they would be added to the spreadsheet. That is just how we handle it. Otherwise, because to me, even if I'm at a basketball game, well, business cards were purchased by us, you're using our signs, like, what's an SOI, right? Or a Facebook post, you're technically still represented by the team. So we did it to where you had to come and add it to the spreadsheet so we could talk about, where did this person come from, and are we in agreement it's actually an SOI.
And I hope you're taking notes, because this was all the stuff you were thinking about earlier. Like, what's in your agreement matters. We've talked a lot about agents, and before we move to, we still have exit interviews, social media policy. What do we document and keep track of for personnel, and what can't you ask? And then anything else you guys have. Before I do that, I actually had a DOO client I was coaching who, she was not being honest with me, so I transferred her coaches. Well, 1 month later, I found out she had been spending the last several months working with an agent on the team to duplicate everything that the team did, rebrand it,
To
almost
take it
as if-
out.
and they took everything. They took the database, they took every single process, checklist, document. So write agreements that explain that you cannot do that and how litigation will occur if that happens for both your staff and your agents.
Yeah, that is huge.
That's the whole business. The database is the whole business, and they took it.
We also have that disclosed in our like agreements with any employees, especially.
Yeah,
So
we
we
do
also
too.
have that included in there that it's intellectual property and that they don't have rights to just rip it off and take it.
I mean, I don't think she thought she was doing something that was okay. So, you know, some people are going to do sneaky things anyway, but at least identify in your agreement how you will handle that legally.
Yeah, and your agreement should come from a lawyer or be overlooked. That should be part of your business team having that. As a side note, that reminded me of just the lawyer thing too. A lot of people don't think about it, but you can have an HR company employee as part of your business too, who runs through that and does that. I didn't do any of the handling. It all went through them, and even write-ups I would have approved by the human resources person that I worked with, and the conversations would go through there. So that is potentially an option too, just like the lawyer should be an option when writing these agreements.
Yeah, Zach, I think most of the payroll companies offer that service, right? That additional service.
They may. We had a separate payroll company, but I specifically also worked with an individual, much just like a CPA, since they're only working out in human resources, so policies around everything we're talking about. But yes,
A lot of insurance companies also provide that, that service. I know I actually contracted with somebody for a long time, and then our insurance offered it for free along with our policy. So some people might have policies where it's included, so you can get an HR company involved. And a lot of the HR companies also have attorneys on site on their staff, and so you can get the attorney stuff done by them also. And it's just included. So that's a really nice feature, and you can call at any time and ask questions and say, hey, I have an employee in this situation. They'll walk you right through exactly what you need to do. So those are really good services.
Yeah, I think this is a place we don't really pay much attention or spend much money, and it's so important. Like one person can do a lot of damage.
Yeah.
So we don't have a ton of time left, but we still had exit interviews, social media policy, how to document a personnel file, and what you should not ask. Which one of these four? Let's vote. So who votes exit interviews? Just raise your hand for exit interviews. Okay, raise your hand for social media policy. No one. Okay, raise your hand for personnel files, what to document. Yeah, that one's gonna clearly take it, but I'll do the last one. So raise your hand for what to avoid asking. 1.5 hands, that doesn't count. So, okay, so what do we document for personnel files? That took the cake. Let's discuss.
I think, Janet, this is something you could really talk to, because California, I coached 3 teams in California, and I do know California is the strictest around this.
Yeah.
And my feeling is if you do what California does, you're going to have yourself.
Yeah, probably. Also, you know, the one big thing in California, and I don't know if this is in any other state, but I would say this is probably the #1 thing to be careful about. If you're in California, I don't know about other states, but it's exempt and non-exempt. And so if you have people that are working as salary, and yet they don't meet the description of an exempt employee, they should be paid overtime, and you can get in some big trouble if you don't make sure they're taking their lunches, make sure they're taking their 2 breaks, and that they're not working a minute of overtime without being paid for it. It does not matter that they signed a piece of paper that says that they make $5,000 a month, period, and they work whatever hours. It does not matter. The state will require you to pay overtime. Big, big thing in California. And a lot of companies have gone under because of this one thing. You get one employee who knows the rule. I would make sure that's the one spot you're looking at. And that has nothing to do with the employee files or anything. I just given my little HR speech because that's a big one.
So can I ask a question? You said make sure that they're taking their breaks and their lunches and stuff. So,
in California, and I believe it's federal, you have to give 30 minutes for lunch and 2
right.
15-minute breaks. And so another thing that I would do, and we did this because in my previous company, we actually had somebody file a suit and we ended up winning, but we changed a lot of policies to tighten this up in that making sure everything is really tightened up there, because if you don't have it right, it's really a hole.
There's a
So even
Chris-Ann, like they'll pull the federal description, exempt, non-exempt. Probably the biggest thing for your team will be salary, which your people are definitely, I would guess,
Most-
not hitting.
right.
Yeah, so the minimum in California is like 54,080. And so that's the minimum amount you can pay. And then also the job duties are really important. If you're supervising someone, you're probably going to meet the exemption. And if you're not supervising someone, unless you're the executive assistant, you probably won't meet the rules there. So lots of things to look for there. I would look into that as the first item.
But
And-
when you say that you have to ensure that they're taking their breaks, even though you say, hey, you get a 30-minute break and 2 15-minute breaks,
Mhm.
do you have to go above and beyond that to document it? Oh, okay.
Well, here's what we did. We came up with something for our paychecks. So we would have everybody sign on every paycheck, and it was a little statement that said, I agree that I have been paid for up until this date, every minute that I have worked. I have taken my 15-minute breaks and I have taken my lunch. We have them sign that when we give them the paycheck. So that really is a bit of an insurance policy. You could come back on that later and it could be up for discussion, but we took that as a kind of an insurance policy for ourselves. So really that exempt, non-exempt becomes a little bit less important, because if they're signing that they agree that they're in the clear, then that's kind of a good spot to be in if you ever got challenged. So that's how we kind of solved that 15-minute break and thing, by making people tell us and sign that I've done that. And we were talking about employee files. So a general statement is anytime you have an employee sign something, it needs to be in the file. That's the first rule. And then, obviously their pay and all of those things, if they're signed, they need to be in the file. If you don't have it in the file, you're probably not doing it right. And you can keep the I-9 separate, all medical stuff separate. Don't keep those together, because if somebody wants to send you the paperwork to get copies of the whole file, those things shouldn't be in there. So generally, that's kind of a very high-level overview. Questions?
So one of the things I learned the hard way years ago is when you start having difficulty with an employee and you're at that stage where, hey, things aren't going quite right, but you're not going to fire them, right? You're going to try and work it out with them. You need to document it. You need to have them sign off on that conversation, even though you may not think it's that big of a deal. Because that documents their performance, and it's going to prove to anybody that may ask for it later that, hey, it started on this date and I was very clear in the conversation. Otherwise, it's a he said, she said.
And I would always have a witness in that meeting, and then have the witness sign the paper also, because then you can't have a finger pointing situation when there's a third party in. It's uncomfortable, it's a bummer, but you got to do it.
Yeah, you're protecting the business at that point.
Mhm.
So even though you think a conversation may not be like firing somebody, like still document it, still sign off on it.
Mhm. You should probably have a plan of how to, and all of those kinds of things also, if you're going to do a write-up. And make sure when you do any paperwork that you have anybody sign anything, make sure you have the at-will employment statement on the paper, regardless of what it is. You should have, and if you don't have an at-will statement on your paperwork now, maybe there's some states that you don't so picky, you should have an at-will employment statement for all of your staff. Make sure that that's there and that they've signed for it. Otherwise, you can get into some really wiggly areas with respect to the contracts and that, so it's not worth it. You need to have the at-will statement and that they've signed for it and that it's on every piece of paper they sign. It should be in the employee manual and so on.
Agree with you, Sarah. The PIP plan is a great tool for all of this.
Kevin, I think you had a liability question in this vein.
Sorry, I got disconnected for a bit. Yes, so I started looking into using a cyberbacker. We hadn't used one before. And so as we were going through the meeting earlier today, I started thinking about, after looking over the agreement, I realized that there's not really a lot of protection from a liability standpoint if, like say if a, one of the people, because they work as subcontractors to cyberbacker, or let's just forget cyberbacker, let's just say a company that does a VA, there's not any sort of insurance policy behind that protecting you know, the agent themselves or the broker to any sort of cyber crime that could occur outside of the country. So there's a very big risk gap that I'm very concerned about by using a VA. And I proposed it to my broker and my in-house attorney, and both of them said that, yes, that's actually a very big concern. And I would have never even thought about that.
Yeah, I didn't either.
And so now we went and called, we have a, you know, nearly 800 agents in our brokerage. And we have a pretty big insurance policy to cover. And so we actually got the big man on the phone from the insurance company, and he was like, nope, that policy would not cover any sort of cybercrime that would occur outside of the country. So for instance, if I had a VA that's handling all of my documents, paperwork, scheduling closings, any sort of, you know, any sort of secure information, say if a, like, you know, even like a title company, you know, they have the client fill out, you know, all their information, you know, their social security number. I mean, there's just all the information, all their personal information goes on the information form to go back to the title company, at least here in Texas. And so that sometimes gets emailed back to us as well. So the cyberbacker or the VA would be able to see that. So they're privy to all of this information. All it would take is a friend off to the side that could easily, you know, take that information and go create another bank account somewhere, and then put in the routing number for that bank account and send a false email, because they have access to the actual closer. They know they know who the closer is, they know the title company, they know the closing date, they know everything, and all they have to do is set up another account, create a fake email underneath a fake email address, send it, and then have somebody answer the call and say, oh, yep, that's exactly where you need to send it, and create a massive wire fraud. And it's completely trusted because it's coming from your VA. And I used to be an internal audit at Stewart Title. That's how I know about all this. And I see all this fraud, like immediately I'm like, oh man, this is a huge hole. And so now I'm a little concerned. And so that's why now I'm going back to my broker. And I just wanted to bring it up to you guys, and not to incriminate any sort of VA. Like I'm like ready to sign the docs. Like I need the help right now, but I saw that and I'm like, I cannot take the risk or the liability. If I would be on the hook for $500,000, and if my insurance company doesn't cover it and there's nobody to subrogate against, then we're toast. I lose my entire net worth. So, I mean, anyway, I'm very concerned about it. So, my company or my brokerage right now is looking into it, and we're trying to pull together the, what can be done. I think, a simple insurance policy on the VA company's behalf, if they had an insurance policy, say even up to $1 million coverage, I think that would be sufficient. If there was ever anything that occurred, the company themselves would be able to cover $1 million loss. And then because at least $1 million, that's typically more than the down payment would be on most deals. So, or what their amount would be to wire over rather.
Anyone
So,
seen written policy?
what are your thoughts?
with this?
Yeah, interesting.
Have you reached out to Cyberbacker? Is that the company you're talking about?
Yeah. And I'm a big fan of Cyberbacker. I mean, actually, it's being used right as we speak. And so I don't want to incriminate that at all. But I do need to reach out to the owner to get this cleared up to be able to proceed forward.
I do not want to speak on Craig's behalf. So I thought that he did have something like that and mentioned, and I would call and reach out and get clarification on that. I can't speak for any company.
Well, and so, right. And so I just want clarification. One, I need to know for sure that the corporation is in fact owned in the United States, somewhere in the 50 states. One, that it's based in the United States and it's only the operations that are done over there. And two, the operations in that insurance policy that are happening overseas are being covered by that insurance policy that is based out of the US. And so if there has to be some sort of recourse. If anything ever did happen, I have to have some sort of recourse and someone to subrogate to. If I get named in the suit, my broker gets named in the suit, the title company gets named in the suit, and also the VA companies get named in the suit as well, because it's a party to the it would be a party to the transaction. I'm hiring a service. So anyway, that's it. Any thoughts would be appreciated. I would love, I need to sign this thing quick so I can move forward because I need the help. So any input would be appreciated.
I agree with Zach. I would call Craig. I'd be really surprised if he didn't have something in place. And my guess is if he doesn't and he hears this, he will make sure.
Get some. I'm concerned suddenly. I'm like, oh no, another problem another challenge to solve.
Right.
Opportunity to learn.
Yeah. I'm hesitant to share any thoughts, although I have a lot, because the one person we need to talk to is not the person on the call, right? So everything else would really be a theory, a guess, an opinion, if you need some facts. So I would reach out fast as you can.
And I'm not trying to get into any sort of libel or slander. So please disregard any sort of, that's why I'm saying any VA company. It's not just that one. It's just, I'm realizing a risk from a transaction on an international level and a risk liability issue that could potentially be a threat. So,
and Kevin, this is a really good point, because I have teams that specifically don't want to go through Cyberbacker or one of these VA companies because they think VA companies take too much money. And yet this is a really good point, because they're actually setting themselves up by not doing that, because that may be one of the things that the big companies offer. We'll have to find out.
Yeah.
Right.
I'd be interested in any info after this call that anybody accumulates also, if we can, if you MAPS folks can send it out or something, or if you can send it to the group, Kevin. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for hearing me out. I've been really concerned about this all day. So
I think it's a great call out. I think it's a fantastic point.
It's definitely important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Talk to Craig. Tell
do you have his number by any chance?